On Kelly and Jason Cochran's wedding day, an extra and unusual vow.
Their marriage pact was that if one of them had an affair with somebody, they would kill that person, whether it be her or Jason.
Maybe Kelly forgot the pact when she began an affair with co-worker Chris Regan. Or perhaps she knew exactly what she was doing.
It makes me question whether or not Kelly took a lover on purpose to see what would happen. Perhaps there was a part of her that wanted to kill.
Murder was never very far from the thoughts of Kelly Cochran, and husband Jason was soon on her kill list.
And it was very apparent that he had become somewhat suicidal at times and was falling apart. And she, I think, noticed that was happening. And I think she became fearful that he may say things to get her in trouble.
Why was Kelly Cochran a woman made for murder? Using expert digital imagery from a specialist forensic artist to show the changing faces of a killer, this series reveals the life timelines and the red flags of those who will one day be investigated for taking a life.
Every once in a while, you really come across those people that sometimes we call born evil. It's a very tiny percentage of the population, but they do exist. And with somebody like Kelly, I might put her in that category.
Kelly Marie Gaboyan was more than the average teenage hellraiser. The eldest of 3 siblings, she had a habit of running away from home. She had frequent run-ins with the police in the suburban town of Maryville, Indiana, where she grew up.
I know that Kelly had gotten into, trouble, and this is, based on what her mother reported, that as a juvenile, she had a lot of troubles. They couldn't keep her under control. She ended up in a juvenile facility.
Kelly's parents struggled to control their headstrong daughter. When she began using heroin, they were at their wits' end. She moved out of the family home, but every time Kelly came to visit, her mother would ask her to take a drugs test. It was a desperately worrying time for Kelly's parents.
Many adolescents experiment with drugs, but I think that there is a completely different dynamic going on here where your parents are drug testing you before you come into the house, because they are that fearful that you're going to bring that type of interaction or that type of influence back into the home. Her parents are trying to do right as much as they could. They realized that they had a troubled teen on their hands and they were trying to instill as many proper boundaries as possible, but it also shows you perhaps how deviant she was, even in her young age, that her parents had to do something so extreme to their own child.
It showed just how bad Kelly had become, just how far beyond her parents' influence she'd traveled. Just as Kelly's parents began to worry that she was lost to them forever, Kelly met somebody who seemed to calm her down. His name, Jason Cochran.
Kelly and Jason started dating shortly after high school.
Both of them apparently lived down the street from each other. Kelly indicated that they were neighbors. She referred to him as the boy next door.
It was a glimmer of hope for Kelly's parents, but they were not convinced.
They ended up marrying, and her mother says, they had a nice church wedding for them and everything seemed normal, but I think a lot of times her mother tried to see her as normal or make her seem normal, and she always knew there was something not right.
Were they a good match? Kelly's brother Colton didn't think so. He thought they were like oil and water. They just were so opposite and never should have gotten together.
In fact, forensic neuropsychologist Dr. Judy Ho believes what drew this mismatched pair together was that they shared an extremely troubling personality trait.
Well, I think both Kelly and Jason were both a bit narcissistic. They kind of probably admired the other person for being just like them.
One day, a jurist would reflect on the relationship of the couple, and on Kelly Cochran in particular.
She was hard to handle, and she did have social issues growing up. So could that have played a part in this? I don't know.
It was this personality flaw that would eventually lead them down a very dark path. In the year 2000, the writing was not yet on the wall for the then seemingly happy young couple. Walt Ammerman would later become close friends with Kelly and Jason.
High school sweethearts, it sounded like any happy couple, is what it what it looked like on the outside and what I felt I was dealing with.
As the couple settled into married life in Hobart, Indiana, their relationship developed a complex dynamic, with Kelly very much in charge.
It sounds like Jason was kind of a quiet guy and, reserved. Kelly was more always a dominant, strong, female.
Walt Ammerman got to know Jason when they linked up online to play video games.
I would say that their marriage was controlled by Kelly. Their lives together were controlled by her. She did all the cooking, the financing, everything, the grocery shopping. He didn't really do much of anything. He just did what he could to keep her happy.
Kelly was the main person and the dominant one, the bread maker. Kelly held multiple jobs, so she was the main person in the marriage.
To this day, who ruled the roost in the Cochran household remains open to debate, but the team in Kelly's corner think that whatever happened in the marriage, she gave as good as she got.
When you look at the evidence and look at the texts and the tenor of some of these texts that were sent back and forth and some of the messages, it doesn't necessarily lead me to the conclusion that Kelly was a dominant person.
And as the years wore on, Kelly seemed increasingly disillusioned with her marriage.
That's when Kelly starts saying, Jason changed. She says, Jason used to be the light of my life. It was so upbeat and happy, easy-go-lucky. But then he started getting kind of dark. It's like I could see like the devil in his eyes. He just wasn't the same guy I married.
There were phone calls and texts that went back and forth. Some were rather demeaning from Jason to Kelly.
In 2013, the couple made a huge lifestyle change, one that made little sense to people who knew them. They left the Hobart area and moved 900 miles to Michigan's Upper Peninsula. It was an area where they knew no one, and no one knew them.
Kelly and Jason Cochran weren't from Iron River. They were some of those people that just showed up. All of a sudden, one day, they were here.
Through my discussions with Kelly and Jason Cochran early on, I inquired as to why they moved to Upper Michigan from Indiana. And Kelly's response was, Jason's got medical issues, and Michigan has the medical marijuana law now so that, he can smoke marijuana in Michigan legally for his medical issues. And that too was a red flag for me. Being that, where they resided in Indiana was only, 40 miles or so from the Michigan border in Lower Michigan. So why would you move, 6.5 hours into Michigan from Indiana? It didn't really make sense.
I asked some statements as to why they moved from Indiana to Iron River, Michigan. And they were just looking for new opportunities, is my understanding. It's a beautiful area. I'm not familiar with the part of Indiana that they're from. I've been told it's not the greatest area in the world. And I think they were just looking to get a fresh start and came to an area that they thought they could get a fresh start at.
In Iron River, the couple decided to try something new, something a little unconventional.
I was having dinner with Jason and Kelly at a restaurant there in their town, and oddly, she asked him, "Did you show Walt our friend?" I had no idea what she was talking about. And he showed me a picture of a half-naked woman on his phone, and Kelly said, "Yeah, I found a friend for Jason and I because I love him so much that I wanted to keep him happy." And that threw me for a loop.
Bringing women home for sex sessions was one of the bizarre ways that Kelly tried to show Jason she loved him.
I think in many ways, both Jason and Kelly, despite all of their faults, despite all of their horrible, negative, antisocial traits, there was also a part of them that really wanted to be loved, part of them that wanted to be valued. And when she realized that she was possibly going to lose Jason or make him mad or make him change his mind about her, she became almost ingratiating to him. Let me see what I can do, what lengths I have to go to prove my love to you, to prove my dedication, in a way that obviously would take away from herself because she was bringing women to the table for Jason.
It was just one troubling feature of the Cochrans' unconventional marriage.
And so I think it just shows the ups and downs of many individuals who actually end up taking up a life of crime, that there's actually a part of them that is quite needing of affection and doesn't believe that they're getting it. And they'll do anything, even debase themselves, to be able to get that type of affection.
By setting up threesomes with attractive women, Kelly believed she had made her love for Jason very clear. But was she testing his devotion to her when she started playing the field? One of Kelly's lovers became a long-term affair. His name, Chris Regan.
She winds up meeting Chris Regan on this job at a mine equipment company. And before long, they are having sex.
Had the time come for Kelly and Jason Cochran to put their wedding day pact into action? If either took a lover, the other would kill that lover.
This is certainly not the kind of conversation you might have in a normal relationship in terms of what happens if one person cheats. And yet they brought killing to the table, that if you were to take another lover, I am so possessive, I'm so jealous that I wouldn't allow this person to live on.
In 2014, not long after moving to Iron River, Michigan, Kelly Cochran began an affair with co-worker Chris Regan. Chris had originally moved to the area to be with his girlfriend, local school teacher Terry O'Donnell. He soon fell in love with her and his surroundings.
It's beautiful. Lots of rivers and lakes. And actually, that's one thing Christopher liked about Iron River, is he loved nature. He loved the woods. And so that part is beautiful. And the people are nice. The people I work with are very kind.
Terry fell hard for Chris, a U.S. Air Force veteran.
When Chris would look at me, I just melt. I mean, he just had that he was charismatic, and he just made you feel like you were everything. You know, that you were the only person in the room when he looked at you.
But the relationship stalled when Terry learned that this charming man had kept a guilty secret.
Christopher had an issue with pornography that I found out afterwards, when him and I started talking more about, you know, why he needed a little bit more alone time sometimes. And it was, he was hooked on things on the internet. And I didn't agree with that. And that's why we broke up. I still loved him. And maybe that's why, you know, we stayed friends. I kept in touch with him. He would still call or text, but we couldn't date. We couldn't be a couple because it just wasn't right.
Not long after Terry and Chris separated, he met Kelly Cochran at work. Kelly told Chris that she and her husband Jason had an open marriage, but behind closed doors, Jason was troubled by his wife's infidelity.
It bothered him, but he was afraid of losing his wife, so he tried to allow her to basically live her life and not interfere with it, but it was clearly driving him crazy.
Jason Cochran was emotionally out of control, and out of any control he thought he may have had over a woman whose very makeup made her ready to kill. Mentally, he was in a bad place.
When they were in the UP, I was aware that Jason had went to a mental hospital for a few weeks. I want to say it was probably mentioned that there was a possible affair with somebody or the marriage wasn't going well.
So Kelly's really liking this relationship with Chris. She's having a good time. But Chris isn't liking the job, and he's got a bad knee, and he's not gonna be able to continue this job for long. So he applies for this office job in Asheville, North Carolina, and he gets it. And he's really excited, and Kelly is not.
For his new job, he had to have a physical, and actually, that's the last day I spoke to him. It was October 14th, 2014. That morning, it was about 6 a.m. in the morning, he called me and told me that he was going to be going to Marshfield the next day, and as long as everything came back okay with his physical, that he would have the job.
Chris Regan was planning to leave the area for good. If Kelly and Jason Cochran were going to carry out their wedding day pact, they didn't have long to act.
And it makes me question whether or not Kelly took a lover on purpose to see what would happen. Perhaps there was a part of her that wanted to kill, that wanted to see if Jason would actually stick to his word. And that was a driving force for her to take a lover, on top of the fact that it would feel exciting and that she was keeping a secret, and her being able to participate in deception, which I think were all exciting factors to her.
Ahead of his move, Chris asked his now old flame, but still friend, Terry O'Donnell, to help him.
And we were going to make plans to go for and eat, and then I was going to help him pack and store some of his things for him while he was in North Carolina.
But Kelly Cochran was not out of Chris Regan's life, and she had other ideas for his future.
So Chris Regan's really excited about his new job. The day before he's supposed to leave Iron River to go to the Carolinas and take this new job, Kelly invites him over for dinner. Come on over, have some lasagna. There might be something else in it for you too.
When he arrived, they had their dinner. And they had their embrace. And while embraced in each other's arms, their bodies intertwined, Kelly's husband sneaks up onto Chris while Chris is still in the arms of Kelly. And Kelly's husband pulls the trigger. A single shotgun blast to his head. Can you imagine? And Kelly was in on it. She knew as she held him there, she could see that shotgun being raised up and put to the head of Chris. And a single loud explosion. There would have been blood, there would have been brains everywhere, including on Kelly herself. She would have been covered in brain matter and blood from somebody that she was just sexually intertwined with.
So now Chris is dead. What do? They lay some plastic wrap out and they start cutting Chris's body into pieces. And they're using this electric handsaw. In fact, Kelly later admits that she had to go out and buy a cord for this handsaw. And they're cutting his body, they're sawing it into pieces, and they're dumping the parts into garbage bags. They take the garbage bags, load them in the truck. Then they take the electric saw, they take the plastic, they burn it all in a burn pit. They take that and they dump it into a place called the Caspian Pit. It's this big mining area. Then they take the body parts to a remote field and they just dump it in the woods.
The vow Kelly and Jason had made had been honored. A man was dead, and Kelly Cochran had blood on her hands. When Terry O'Donnell didn't hear from Chris for a few days, she began to panic.
I kept texting, messaging him, and I got no response. And normally he would respond immediately, or when he would have a break if he was at work. So I thought, he's busy. He had packing to do. He had to find a place to live down in North Carolina. And a week went by and I still hadn't heard from him.
On October 27th of 2014, I met Terry O'Donnell, who came to the police department as I was leaving for the day. She was shook up, she was crying. That's when she told me that something was wrong. Her friend was missing. She hadn't heard from him since October 14th. And then one of his coworkers spotted his vehicle parked in a park and ride just east of Iron River.
And I was talking to people at work and I was, what should I do? I can't get a hold of him. And I went up to the apartment, knocked on the door, and there was no one there. And everyone told me that I was being paranoid and that I should just, relax.
I mean, she checked in with him pretty much daily. And that's why it was odd to her when she couldn't make contact with him.
And one of my friends that he works with told me he hadn't been at work for over a week. And then I got panicky. And then he told me that he saw Christopher's car at the park and ride in Bates. And so I drove out that evening to the park and ride, and his car was there, and his car was his baby, his Genesis. He was so proud of it. And I looked inside, and his knee brace was there. He had water bottles left. A hat was in there. And I couldn't get in the car. It was locked. And I was afraid that he was in the trunk. Just fear, complete fear came over me that I knew something happened to him.
Terry had told me where Chris had been working, and I happened to know the human resource director there very well. So I gave her a call, asked her about Chris, you know, who his friends were, just so that we knew who we might be able to call to locate him. At that point, when the human resources director told me that, you know, Chris he didn't really have a lot of friends there, just a couple people that he really, you know, would associate with, and that there was a woman that he was allegedly having an affair with that also worked there. So I asked her who that woman was. This woman was, you know, Kelly Cochran.
Terry already knew about the affair, and she had a feeling that Chris's lover might know something about his disappearance.
I kept looking and searching for Christopher. I would walk in the woods. I would walk back behind Cochran's home, trying to find something. And when they had a big dog, I'd hear a dog bark. It'd scare me. I was afraid if Kelly ever found out that I was the one who missed Christopher, that I was the one that reported him missing. I was afraid her husband might come looking for me.
A breakthrough of sorts was about to be made to uncover the role played by Jason and Kelly Cochran. A map, literally to their house, turned up in Chris Regan's car.
So it would be, you know, not long after that my sergeant makes contact with Chris Regan's, you know, vehicle in the park and ride, and gains entry to it, just to be sure that, you know, there's not someone in the trunk or whatever, and notices, you know, on the front seat flipped upside down is a piece of paper with directions, you know, and I just remember her saying, I can't make heads or tails of these directions, but, you know, this is what's laying on the front seat of his car. And as she reads me the directions, it matches the directions that I had just gotten from the deputy to Kelly Cochran's house. So immediately, I've got some red flags.
Detective Laura Frizzo became convinced that Chris Regan had been killed the night he had gone to Kelly Cochran's. The challenge now would be proving it. Was Kelly Cochran made for murder? Chris Regan was missing. Suspecting foul play, state troopers paid a visit to Kelly and Jason Cochran.
They were met by Jason Cochran, who seemed irritated and told them that Kelly was not there. The trooper had noticed a silhouette in the upper window upstairs of the residence and actually made mention of that to the sergeant, saying, there's somebody upstairs. And as they're talking to Jason, Kelly presents herself. And so they talk to her outside. She admits that she was having an affair with Chris. She admits that she knew he was supposed to have shown up for a medical appointment for his new job, but she claims that she hadn't seen him since, you know, around the 12th, 13th of October.
They were able to start developing a linkage between the Cochrans and, you know, the victim, Chris Regan.
Chris Regan's car had been found at a nearby park and ride. Inside, detectives had found a yellow post-it note with directions to Kelly's home.
I asked Kelly if she thought it was odd that Chris's car would be parked in the park and ride. And her response, Kelly's response to the sergeant was, yeah, I'd find that very odd. He loved that car, past tense. And she found that to be very odd as well.
They haven't said anything that he's murdered or that he's missing. She's already referring to him in the past tense.
I knew that Christopher wasn't alive anymore. I knew something's happened to him, that somebody did something to him.
Detectives shared Terry's instincts. They felt certain that Chris had been murdered and they believed the Cochrans were responsible, but they had no proof, no body. They did, however, have a very nervous suspect.
I remember during the interview of Jason Cochran in particular, how he immediately entered the interview room and immediately broke down, began to cry about his health issues and his life. And it was just my opinion at that time that people don't generally act that way, that to me was a sign of guilt or nervousness or anxiety or whatever it was, but to me it wasn't normal. And to me it was a huge red flag. His behavior was a huge red flag.
Kelly, on the other hand, was completely unfazed by finding herself in a police interview room.
Kelly was just so calm and cool and relaxed that anyone that would have met her for the first time would have thought, there's no way she can hold it together this well if she had been, taken part in something like this. Body language, she was able to control. Jason was completely the opposite. Couldn't hold it together.
Kelly said, oh, I stopped by and he wasn't home. I didn't know where he was. And, just like it was just another day.
5 months passed with no sign of Chris, dead or alive. With the post-it note and the admission from Kelly of an affair, Iron River Police were able to take the search a step further.
It was the first week of March, and there was still snow on the ground, and we decided we're going to go ahead and do this first search warrant. That I finally have enough probable cause where I just need to do it.
It was March 2015. The search of the Cochran's home turned up nothing. Where was Chris Regan's body? Detectives turned to Michael Nager, a former cop himself who helps solve unsolved homicides and missing persons cases.
Iron County is a very rugged area. It's a historic area with a lot of old mining. So we have a lot of old mines and mining relics. And we have a lot of caving grounds where old mine shafts and stuff have caved in and then they filled in with water. So you have a lot of those types of areas, which are common, often, very easy to conceal evidence, to dispose of evidence, to hide evidence, or a lot of places for potential clandestine burial sites.
The day after their home was searched, the Cochrans left the state. With no body and no proof of any crime, Detective Frizzo and her colleagues were powerless to stop them.
The following morning, Kelly and Jason Cochran take off. They completely leave, taking just what they could fit in their truck, and would never return to Michigan.
We've seen this in the past in these killer couples, that basically both of them would exhibit antisocial, shocking, impulsive behavior, and they would serve as the upping the ante factor for the other person. So combined, they were more lethal than they ever were, because there's another person who's goading you on, who's encouraging you to do depraved things, and who's telling you that these things are okay to do.
Kelly and Jason went home to their native Hobart, Indiana. But instead of enjoying freedom from suspicion, Jason was feeling the strain. Was he, in the eyes of Kelly, now a liability and in danger from his killer wife?
And it was very apparent that he had become somewhat suicidal at times and was falling apart. And she, I think, noticed that was happening. And I think she became fearful that he may say things to get her in trouble.
Friend Walt Ammerman noticed that the dynamic of their relationship had shifted. Kelly had become even more controlling.
I felt like he never really wanted to make Kelly mad at anything. I felt like he was, at times, maybe, I don't want to say afraid of her, but I think that there was some apprehension there of some sort. On the other hand, Kelly was very controlling, very wanting to control everything.
Was that an ingredient which made her ready to kill again?
I think Jason Cochran knew his wife was a dangerous person. I think that was partially why he was attracted to her. Both of them were seeking a thrill, and they found it in each other. So I think he was perfectly clear who he had married. I'm sure if it wasn't clear before their joint killing of Regan, it was clear then when they were both dismembering that body together.
Jason had indeed become a little afraid of Kelly, but he may not have known that she was prepared to kill him.
I still don't think Jason thought it was going to come around and actually end up harming him and killing him. I really think that he had this sort of brazen, simplistic narcissism that somehow he was going to be above her wrath. That because he was her first true love and he was her husband, that none of the things that she could do to other people, she would ever do to him.
He couldn't have been more wrong. In February 2016, Kelly Cochran was at the marital home in Hobart when she made a frantic telephone call.
Kelly calls 911. He's not breathing. His mouth is like, I don't know what's going on. It might be an overdose. I don't know what's wrong. She's like panicking.
The police arrive, and from all apparent appearances, it looks as though Jason is a heroin user and Jason has overdosed on heroin.
To first responders, it looked as though Jason, like so many heroin addicts, had accidentally killed himself. Within hours, Kelly had been in touch with Walt.
There was a phone call on February 20th, Kelly contacting me to say that Jason had died that night. And immediately, my wife told me, well, she did it. And I wasn't really buying that yet. And over the weekend, she was very adamant about the fact that I needed to contact somebody in law enforcement in the Upper Peninsula and tell them that Jason was dead, because it's not even the same state where he died in. And she knew enough about the law to know that they needed to know. So I contacted the FBI and I said I knew Jason and Kelly very good, and they had told me that they were being looked at for this person missing. They have not told me anything about the fact that they did it or anything like that, but I feel I needed to let you know that one of them died on Saturday, and this is Monday. And right away, the guy said, how did Jason die? I said, I didn't even tell you it was Jason. He said, if one of them died, it was Jason. And we need to get on that.
I get a call from two of the FBI agents that I've been working with who tell me they got a call on their tip line saying that, something was not right, that they feel like Kelly was involved in Jason's death. They feel that there's something more to this Michigan case with the missing man.
With fresh information reigniting Laura Frizzo's investigation in the Upper Peninsula, a second detective, Jeremy Ogden, picked up the case, 7 hours south in Indiana.
I answered a phone call from the FBI tip line, and they said that they had received an anonymous call and that, we needed to take a closer look at Jason Cochran's death. And at that time, I didn't even know that he had died. And they said that, it was a possibility that Jason Cochran and Kelly Cochran had been involved in a missing persons case up in the UP, and that, they had fled to Hobart, Indiana.
Killer Kelly Cochran's murderous ways were slowly coming into focus. Walt and his wife did not believe Jason had died from a heroin overdose, nor did detectives in 2 states. Meanwhile, Terry O'Donnell was convinced Kelly and perhaps Jason had had a hand in Chris Regan's death. Detective Jeremy Ogden decided to ramp up the pressure a little by showing up at Jason's funeral. How would Kelly cope?
I had been standing in the back of the room watching her before I ever walked up there. And she had sat there pretty silent, and I hadn't seen her shed a tear. She was just sitting there very quiet, and she looked angry almost. And so after I paid my respects, I walked up to her and I gave her a hug. And I think it shocked her, and she, acted as though she was crying at that point. She, seemed like she was upset, and I just went on my way and I sat in the back of the room and I sat there. And there's a cousin to the family who knew me from my law enforcement career, and he said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm looking into Jason's death." And he said, "Well, you're going to want to pay attention." I said, "Okay."
Ogden was told to dig deeper. Everyone suspected there was more to Jason's death than a simple overdose. But with plenty of suspicion and no real evidence, Ogden and his colleagues needed a breakthrough. They cooked up a bold plan, one that relied on a little help from Jason's friend.
And I said, I need you to do something for me. I want you to be my confidential informant. And Walt looked at me and he said, am I going to be in danger?
Both Laura Frizzo and Jeremy Ogden became convinced that the key to uncovering Kelly's role in Jason's death was to find out exactly what had happened to Chris Regan.
I had to find out where Christopher Regan was disposed of in order for Kelly to confess to killing Jason. And I knew this from the very beginning. I knew that she would never confess to killing Jason unless I somehow got her to admit what happened to Chris Regan.
The vast open spaces of the Upper Peninsula had been searched dozens of times without a trace of Chris's body. But in early 2017, Mike Nager and his team had a breakthrough. Cell site analysis, a relatively new technique at the time, which showed Kelly's phone had been at the same park and ride where Chris's car was found abandoned. Meanwhile, a search of the Cochran's computer hard drives revealed satellite images of a very revealing location in the UP, one where bodies might be easy to hide.
We ended up finding a satellite image, Google satellite imagery, that zoomed right in several times on the Caspian Pit, on a specific piece of the bank of the Caspian Pit.
The pit was very close to the Cochran house.
In the end, we were able to establish that by looking at the date on when that was downloaded from Google, that it was prior to, in the end when we learned, it was prior to when Chris was murdered.
When detectives visited the site, a picture of what had happened began very gradually to emerge. They discovered a burn barrel big enough to have been used to dispose of body parts. Its shape and size matched exactly a space in Kelly and Jason's garden.
Chief Frizzo, using some state police divers, found the barrel for the weapon that was used to kill Chris, and that was relatively near the Cochran's house. It was just a couple roads away. I mean, you could basically see that, from their house almost, if it wasn't for some trees.
In Indiana, Jeremy Ogden hauled Kelly Cochran back into the interrogation room. She deflected questions about why their burn barrel had turned up in the Caspian Pit and came up with an excuse for visiting the car park where Chris's vehicle had been found. It was time to launch a sting operation. Could detectives get the evidence they needed to prove that Kelly Cochran was a woman made for murder?
After the fact that they took the life of her lover, per their earlier agreement, she then became extremely angry with him that perhaps in her mind she believed that her husband took away the only chance at true love that she was going to have.
She had been the heroin user teenager, the blushing bride, vowing murder on her wedding day, and by 2018, she was suspect number 1 in 2 murders. To catch Kelly Cochran, detectives from Iron River, Michigan and Hobart, Indiana, recruited friend Walt Ammerman for a remarkable sting operation.
I talked to Walt for all of about 5 minutes, and I said, you are the kind of man that every detective hopes walks into his case, and I need you to do something for me. I want you to be my confidential informant.
He said, I have an idea, and I want you to call her on a recorded call, and I'd like you to tell her that Jason mailed you a letter a while back and wanted you to hold on to it in case something ever happened to him.
Please forward this letter to the Iron River Police Department. Attention, Chief Laura Frizzo. Do not open the letter that's contained within this manila envelope. And I signed it, Jason.
My first thought was, this is never gonna work. She is too smart. She knows everyone's looking at her closely right now, especially with her husband dying. There is no way she's gonna fall for this, but I was willing to try anything.
I called her, and it was kind of convenient that she was kind of busy, so it was going to be a short call. I found out later she was at his parents' house. And I just said I had this letter that Jason mailed me and told me to hold on to another letter, and said if anything ever happened to him, I needed to send this on to the police in the Upper Peninsula. And her sigh and her cry and her please don't are 3 things I'll never forget.
The woman made for murder was about to incriminate herself.
There's this huge gasp for air by her. And at that moment, I'm like, okay, hang on, what's coming next? And the next words are like, don't send it, don't do that, throw it away, whatever it is that she uses. But it's to get rid of it, distance yourself from it, distance me from it, don't do this to me. And for those 30 seconds, it was like I had the biggest fish of a lifetime on, because I knew that she had taken it all the way.
Cochran believed the letter was authentic. She knew the game was up. The face of a killer was slowly emerging. Cochran began talking.
They don't want to tell you until you catch them. Once you catch a person like this, then they want to tell you. They don't want to tell anybody because they still have that survival mode in their mind where they're protecting themselves, and they don't want to go to jail. And they don't want to be discovered. I think after you catch them, he's right. Then they want to tell you because they want everyone to know what they really are.
He just sent me an email. I, of course, right away opened the email, and there's a copy of the recording from this phone call. And I thought, obviously it didn't go well because he would have called and told me. So I'm sitting in my, office, and I opened this recording, and when I listened to it, I just about fell off my chair. And I thought, he got her.
She says that, her and her husband entered into this pact on their marriage night. And so when she tells me about the marriage pact, about killing each other's lovers or killing the lover herself, I tell her, so that would mean that you were responsible to kill Chris Regan.
Kelly admitted that Chris Regan had died at her home in the Upper Peninsula. She was taken by detectives to the Caspian Pit.
The day we go back to that marked area, and it was myself and the cadaver dog and the dog handler, and within 10 minutes of being there, locate Chris Regan's skull. Another thing she showed us that day was where she threw the gun, which the Michigan State Police dive team did recover.
Kelly Cochran claimed that Jason had discovered she and Chris in an embrace at the top of the stairs leading to the basement. Enraged, Jason had killed Chris with a single rifle shot to the head. Later, she would tell a court that she had killed Jason in revenge for Chris's death. That part of the story may be true.
I think Kelly was very much a person who didn't understand the grays. Everything was either black or white. Everything was one way or the other. There's no in between. And obviously life is complex. Life has a lot of in betweens, and she really couldn't deal with that. And I think that's eventually why Kelly decided to take revenge on her own husband after the fact that they took the life of her lover per their earlier agreement. She then became extremely angry with him that perhaps in her mind, she believed that her husband took away the only chance at true love that she was going to have.
Her story is she sat on Jason's chest and held her hands over his nose and mouth as he was trying to throw up from the heroin overdose that she gave him. And she wanted him to see her and know that she did that, I think. And I can't wrap my head around that. I don't think any normal person can.
But she was not a normal person. She was a killer. All it took was for her to think she had just cause.
Kelly took things into her own hands after Regan was killed. And even though she had a part in that killing and she helped her husband dismember her lover, and there was even a rumor that she fed her lover's remains to friends and colleagues at a barbecue, she then came around and decided that that was still something that she needed to take revenge upon, that she didn't actually agree wholeheartedly to take away her lover's life, and now she was going to take matters into her own hands.
In May 2017, at a hearing in Iron County Court in Michigan, Kelly Cochran was found guilty of murder, larceny, concealing the death of an individual, and lying to a police officer in relation to the murder of Chris Regan. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. It was a unanimous verdict.
During the trial, you heard things about how she grew up. And could she have been that much of a murderer, that type of person? Knowing things brought up during trial, even from her mother, that said she had issues when she was younger. Yeah, she could have been that type of person.
Every once in a while, you really come across those people that sometimes we call born evil. It's a very tiny percentage of the population, but they do exist. And with somebody like Kelly, I might put her in that category.